Hey, Dave Cribbs here, lead trainer at Auto Dealer University. Welcome to your Workout Wednesday. Today we're going to be talking about prepared responses. And as I go into that, I kind of want to lay a foundation that you'll find as a theme throughout Auto Dealer University. I'm going to start off with the definition of a salesperson, and that's simply someone who can lead another person or persons to a weighted decision in their favor. So whose favor would I mean when I say I'm going to lead them to a weighted decision in their favor? I'm talking about the customer, of course, because if I can accomplish that, think about this for a moment. If I can accomplish helping guide and lead someone to a very weighted decision in their favor, right, then the only logical conclusion is to move forward and take advantage of that transaction. So let me break this down one other way for you, and then we're going to get into how important prepared responses are, because in my opinion, not just my opinion, I believe it's fact, right? The fact is that if you want to skill up and become a better closer, a better salesperson, right? Because initially, by the way, our first job is getting the attention of the customer, marketing, and we are a marketer. Now we have the ability as individuals to market as well as corporately as the dealership. But the point being that we do a lot of things creatively to obtain a customer. But once the customer is in front of us, and it doesn't matter if it's on the phone, through text and email messages, or standing right in front of us, that is when we truly are tested as far as our skill level to move a deal forward and to be able to really sell, which is leading a customer to a weighted decision in their favor. See, if I am leading them to a weighted decision in their favor, it means really ultimately they're receiving more value than I am. That is the whole idea. Not only will your closing ratios go up, but your grosses will go up as well. We'll talk about that in another training. But here's the deal. Think about this for a moment. Here's the second part of that. We've defined what a salesperson was, but the second part of that is what's really going on. I mean, what is really going on when you meet a customer? How do we actually get them, no matter where they're at, how early in the process or how far along, how do we get them to actually pull the trigger? And there's only one way, I guarantee you, and that is the customer has to cross a plane in their mind. Again, you hear this as a theme throughout Auto Dealer University, in virtually all of my trainings anyway, and I'm sure all the other trainers as well would agree. But here's the thing, the customer has to cross a plane in their mind. Now, what we do traditionally in the auto industry is we learn this road to the sale, right? For lack of a better term, it's been around for years, but it doesn't matter really what your process is. There is a road to the sale in your individual store. Now, that could be a 10-step process, a 5-step process, an 8-step process, 12-step, doesn't matter, it's irrelevant. The bottom line is there's a map that's laid out for you as to what's expected to try to help get the customer to the place where they cross the plane in their mind and they move forward, right? They feel great about the deal, the car, you, whatever the case may be. They get to the logical conclusion that now is the time to move forward. The problem is, our struggle is, we don't get everybody to cross that plane. So where our skill level comes in and is paramount, how we become really good at what we do is by having a more efficient process or way that we get the customer to arrive at that point. Now, here's what I would contend is the fact that if you really want to get to a place where you can do that more fluidly, all it takes is one secret sauce, which is prepared responses. Prepared responses. So what do I mean by that? All I'm really saying is that when we meet a customer, I will also gain your agreement that we are at that point the biggest influencer in the customer moving forward. I think we would all agree with that, right? Or not moving forward, because we're the one communicating with the customer. Now think about it for a moment from the customer's perspective. I just want you to take a step back for a second and think about a customer truly, no matter what position they're in. When they come onto a dealership lot or they begin to reach out and kind of start the process of looking for a vehicle, think about from their perspective. They have to arrive at that place where they cross the plane, and how they get there is by trying to decipher what it is that we have to offer, what we're going to do, does it make sense to them, do they feel good about it, all of those things that it takes. So when I think about prepared responses and I think about the fact that I'm the biggest influencer because I'm the one actually communicating with the customer, the other thing that I realize, and I'll share with you, is that each and every one of us have creative control over that. And what I mean by that is when a customer says, I'm just looking, we actually get to do what? We get to respond, right? So if we just go out every time and kind of wing it and some of you might say, well, I'm pretty good, I'm pretty savvy with just feeling out a customer in the beginning and knowing how to kind of greet and talk to them and stuff like that, right? I would say kudos to you, that's fantastic. But the problem with that is it's only going to take you so far. You might be able to close a higher percentage even if you have a lot of that natural ability and talent or skill level that you've kind of expanded upon. But can you get to unbelievable closing ratios? And here's how you do that, and here's what I mean by that. You see, if I go out and I meet a customer and they say they're just looking, if I have a prepared response that I know is the most effective way to respond to that customer, that's going to do two things. And by the way, this is how we determine how strong our prepared responses are. We ask ourselves these two questions. They're simple, right? This is the first one is, will it appeal and make sense to the customer? Remember the foundation a moment ago? Leading the customer to a weighted decision in their favor. Understanding that the customer has to experience certain things before they cross the plane in their mind to actually pull the trigger and take delivery. Well, here's what they need to hear. Here's what will develop them quicker, faster, and more solid in moving towards crossing the plane in their mind. When I say something to the customer, because it's my creative control, once the customer says hello, or I'm just looking, or they initially reach out to the dealership, I have creative control as to what they're going to hear next. That is the bottom line. And every time that I exercise that ability, it impacts how that deal is going to move forward. So my suggestion here, what I'm suggesting is that imagine if we had the most effective response or reply to a customer that did these two things, that appealed to the customer and or made sense to the customer, right? And check out number two, it just kind of piggybacks right on that. You've got to ask yourself the question, does it help the deal move forward? Does it help the deal move forward? Because not only do I want to appeal and make sense to the customer, right? And by the way, we can do this in the most soft sell approach. If it's not a high pressure, it's just honestly, it's just a conversation about how we help the customer reach their ultimate goal, right? And we can do that in an amazing way by having prepared responses. I'm going to get into a few very specific examples here in a moment. But again, does it help the deal move forward, right? Because oftentimes our problem is, and I want you to imagine just for a moment, we talked a little bit about the idea of the road to the sale, right? Or no matter how many steps you have, no matter what your process looks like at your store, there's a beginning point when we're first introduced to the customer, no matter how that introduction occurs, to the end point where they actually take delivery of the vehicle, right? So imagine a straight line. Imagine a straight line, because if I ask each and every one of you, what's step number one at your store? What's step number 2, 3, 4, 5, right? You're going to give me the timeline of a natural occurring deal in your process, okay? So let's just say, for example, we know that we're going to meet and greet a customer in one way or another, and then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation as to discovery, right? Interview, qualify, whatever you want to call it. We're going to find out what it is that the customer is looking to accomplish. And then from there, we're going to go to the next step, which would likely be selection, right? And trying to figure out, do we have a product that maybe helps meet the needs or wants or desires of this customer? So the point is, and we can go all the way down to the end, but the point is, we know that step 1 is this, step 2, step 3, step 4. We could draw a straight line and go through our sales process right to the end. The problem occurs when, and by the way, this is the customer's job, like it or not, and it's not intentional by the customer, but their job is to take us out of the steps. And what I really mean by that, I use that as an analogy to kind of have fun with it, In fact, I used to do a training called When Buyers Attack, right? The idea here is that they say things that we have to come up with a response to, right? Objections, situations, stalls, everything, complaints, right? Anything that the customer might throw at us, okay? In order for us to keep that process moving and go to the next step, because that is our problem, by the way. When we don't make a sale, it's because we stopped. We reached a point at which we could not go to the next step. That is where our deals fall apart, right? And it could be 2 minutes in, or it could be almost all the way finished, right? But the bottom line is, when a deal doesn't happen, it's because it stopped at a certain point, right? And sometimes I say, kind of kidding around, that it's the customer's job to take us out of our steps. It's really just because it kind of happens naturally. And if we allow the customer to either drive the bus, if you will, or get us, in a position where we don't really know the answer or have the best response, that deal's just not going to move forward. So this is how important. I have to lay that foundation because I think that's huge, and really getting bought into really understanding how you can score huge with prepared responses. So I'm just going to give you a quick example, right? Let's say you have a customer comes in, this happens all the time, and the spouse or the other party isn't there, right? We need the other party to move forward, or at least, hang on a second. We may not need the other party to physically be there, but it's what the customer has shared with us early on or at some point in the process. So what I'm going to do as a salesperson, because I've been down this road before, right? And I'm going to encourage you, most of you I'm sure have. If you haven't, think about this for a moment. And I think those of you who have, which will be most of you, would agree with me, that oftentimes it turns out that the party who's not there doesn't really have to be there if the customer gets sold. If the customer gets sold. In other words, oftentimes we can figure out ways. Number one, we oftentimes find out that the customer, it was just an excuse, right? It was an excuse, you know what it was? It was a prepared response from them, right? Hey, they're working harder on getting this right than we are sometimes. That's why I said earlier, it's customer's job to get you out of the steps, because the customer comes in, they haven't crossed the plane yet. You have to think about that. They haven't crossed the plane. So they're going to have all these different reasons or things that they come up with that keep them from moving the deal forward, even if it's their intent to accomplish this goal over time. They're still trying to figure out when, where, who, how, why, right? So I'll get off my soapbox, but asking yourself these two questions. So let's go back to that scenario real quick. Husband or wife isn't with someone, right? You go out on the lot, you meet and greet the customer, and right away they say, hey, just looking today, Dave, actually, I wanted to take a quick look at a Camry, but my wife's not here today, so not really doing anything today, right? So now we have a choice, right? Now the customer has shared with us some intel, which by the way is great. It's that second step, right? We just did the meet and greet. Now we're finding out the intel to interview, the qualified, the discovery. All that's fantastic. In fact, the customer just teed us up. They set us up for how we're going to respond. Now, there's two things going on here, by the way. Remember when I said we have creative control as to how we respond to that customer? There's that dynamic. Now, I'm going to take advantage of that dynamic by coming up with a prepared response that does two things. It appeals to the customer or makes sense to the customer, and it helps me move the deal forward, right? Now, the other dynamic of that, and gosh, I just lost my train of thought on that, but the customer, it's my opportunity now I'm going to respond. So I'm either going to have something prepared or I'm not, or I'm going to wing it, or I'm going to just do whatever. So here's how I'm going to respond to that customer. A customer says, hey, I was going to look at a Camry, but hey, my wife, my husband, they're not here today, can't really do anything. Hey, no worries, right? In fact, remember that we're getting agreement with the customer as well, right? It's got to make sense. It's got to appeal to the customer. So now, naturally, if a customer has told me that, I got to think, here's where it gets interesting. Here's where you can use your creative control. And here's where we'll give you plenty, by the way, in Auto Dealer University of these prepared responses. But I want you to think for a moment. Just think for a moment. This is probably actually maybe the bigger part of the training, is the customer just said to us, hey, not doing anything today, right? Now, there's some rules of engagement when it comes to hearing anything that's less than desirable that we would want to hear. We don't want to hear, I'm not moving forward today because my wife or husband isn't here. But unfortunately, some salespeople take that to heart right then and there. Now, here's where the opportunity is. I have to think about, and here's what the bigger training is, what would the customer ultimately need to hear, maybe even like to hear, but definitely need to hear, that would allow them to save face, by the way, in what they just told us, right? Have us accept that and take them off the hook. The customer wants to be taken off the hook. That's exactly what they just told you, by the way. Hey, settle down there, big fella. I'm not ready to do anything. In fact, my wife or husband isn't here, and that's why. So now they're asking us to take them off the hook. So why don't I just do what they're asking, right? For now, because here's what I know. If I'm going to lead a customer to a weighted decision in their favor, and I have creative control over my responses, I know something is going to change. Something's going to change in the next 15, 20, 30 minutes, whatever that might look like, that's going to get the customer in a different place. And all of the sudden, whether it's an excuse or it's legitimate, we're going to find a way to get to overcoming the objection of the spouse not being there. So here's how we make that work initially, right? Again, rules of engagement, by the way, you'll find this in another training. Rules of engagement for anything less than desirable that we want to hear. Empathize and agree with the customer. Here's the big one. Here's the big one that I just mentioned a moment ago that you typically won't hear in other trainings. Take them off the hook. Take them off the hook, and then provide a solution to move forward. Remember, does it help the deal move forward, right? Well, we got to make it make sense to help the deal move forward. So again, here we go. A wife or husband isn't there. Can't buy anything today. The first thing I'm going to do is empathize and agree with the customer. Absolutely. Hey, I'd want my spouse to be a part of it too. No worries there. But here's the cool thing, Mr. Customer. Since you're already here, right? Since you're already here, what I can do for you, because ultimately if you do find something here that maybe makes sense, your wife or husband, you said you want them to be a part of it, I want to give you as much information as I can. That way, even if it's late, notice how I phrase this, even if it's later. See, now what I've done is I've opened myself up to planting the seed with the customer that they're not going, I'm okay. I'm not trying to lock them into today or get them to do something right now. By the way, I can't do that. It makes no sense for me to do that 2 or 3 minutes, 5 minutes into the deal, right? So, but notice how I phrase that. Even if, meaning that I'm actually leaving the door open, kind of subliminally, I'm leaving the door open for it could happen today. So I say, even if it's later, when you go home, you can be able to share this information that you have. I'll get you pricing information, whatever it is, and that way your wife or husband can look at the whole picture as well. So while you're here today, let me go ahead and get that for you. By the way, are you considering you considered the Camry? Let me ask you a question. What drew you to the Camry, right? A great qualifying question, by the way. Again, a qualifying question, by the way, is also a prepared response, right? Now I'm moving right back into the process. Remember earlier when I said imagine a straight line of your sales process? See the customer, try to fork off to the right. Now what I say, I give a great prepared response that appeals or makes sense to the customer and now helps me move the deal forward. So I draw the line. They forked off to the right. I drew us right back to that line of that sales process, and I'm in step number 2. I'm interviewing and qualifying the customer. A great qualifying question. If your customer has drawn to a particular car or comes up with a particular car or mentions a particular car, hey, what drew you to the Camry? Was it the styling? Was it this? Was it, so you can expand if they don't. But the idea here, and by the way, I can't help myself. The idea with every qualifying question, which is they're all prepared responses, by the way, is to open up Pandora's box. In other words, what I really want to do is get quicker the information that allows me to do the right things and come up with the next prepared response that keeps the deal moving forward. We're going to skip forward for a moment and then I'm going to wrap it up. So I'm going to give you a couple of other examples. Sometimes you may have heard of pattern interruptions and misdirection, right? A misdirection can have a sort of a negative connotation to it, but the idea here is that, remember, I have creative control of my prepared responses. So, and I have to make sure that any prepared response I come up with does these two things. Does it appeal, make sense to the customer, and does it help move the deal forward? So there are some stores where, and I love this, by the way, and you can do this even if this is not your policy at your store on the initial meet and greet, you can actually do this a little bit early in the deal and it will still make natural sense and still comply with your particular dealership's policy on the whole meet and greet system, right? So here's the deal. So one of the things that I'll often hear some dealers say, they'll actually go out and greet a customer, hey, welcome to ABC Ford, hey, I'm Dave, you're Bill, you're Susie. Hey, by the way, my job today is just to get you information on all the vehicles out here. If you see anything you like, I can get you pricing, interest, down, anything that you want, I can get you if you see anything that makes sense today, right? So that kind of opening, that kind of pattern, they call it a pattern interruption. The idea there is that you're proactively sharing with the customer immediately, hey, I'm here to get you pricing information, whatever. They're not accustomed to that, right? Normally they're accustomed for fighting for that information. So that's why it's kind of an interruption of their thought process. But it does, think about this for a moment. If the customer believes that they're going to be fighting to get a price or they're coming in to really get that information eventually, right? Even if it is step 6, 7, 8, 9, whatever, in the customer's mind, you know that they often want to jump right to that. So what I'm doing in that greeting is I'm proactively addressing that right away. Now let me give you another example. If your store doesn't subscribe to that particular opening or greeting, let me give you an example that will be comfortable for everyone in a normal, more traditional greeting and leading into a sales process. And that might look like, hey, you've greeted the customer. Customer really is just really kind of taking a look at the lot, maybe didn't come in on a particular car. Oftentimes, salespeople are kind of wandering around the lot with the customer and things like that. And the customer's like, well, look at this. This one is, whatever, marked such and such. Do you know what's your bottom line on this, right? Sometimes the customer will say that. What's your bottom line on this, right? Well, as a salesperson, if I'm skilling up, right, if I've got skills, I need this. I need that prepared response. So if a customer's standing out by a truck, for example, and they say, well, what's your bottom line on this? You've only been with them a few minutes. You really don't know the whole story. We often are in that situation. And I think that's something we need to talk about, right? Because oftentimes you don't get this particular training necessarily, right? So the question you ask yourself, again, when I'm going to respond to that customer, when he says or she says, hey, well, what's your bottom line on this, right? It's got to appeal, make sense to the customer, but also help me move the deal forward. So then I'm going to say something like this. So what I'm going to do, remember by the way, the 3 ingredients to anything that we hear that's less than desirable as to what we would want to hear, because ultimately it's not really what I want to hear. But how do I turn that around, right? What are the 3 rules of engagement? Empathize, agree, take them off the hook, and then provide a solution, right? So I'm going to do that right now when that customer says, hey, what's the bottom line on this? I'm going to say something to the effect of like this. Absolutely, actually I can get you that within a matter of minutes. I can get you that payment information, anything that you'd like. In fact, let me just grab the VIN number off of this and I'll get started on this right away, right? So what I'm going to do then though is I'm going to do something a little bit different. Is if I'm engaged in that conversation where the customer really is, if they take me up on that, in other words, if I say, hey, I can get you this in a matter of minutes, if you feel like this is the one you'd like pricing information, man, we can cut to the chase, we're very transparent here. And here's another word track I often use. By the way, it's one of the reasons I chose to work here. By the way, it's one of the reasons I chose to work here. I work that word track in here and there throughout a sales process at some point. It helps sell the dealership It validates our credibility, all of those good things. But I'm going to say something like that to the customer. If the customer does want to get pricing information, I'm going to go, hey, let me go and get this stock number, get this inside so we can get it priced out. I'll be right back. And I'm going to come right back out with the key. I'm going to say, hey, I got Johnny, my new car manager. He's going to pull this up for us and get it all priced out. Couple of things on this particular truck I want to make sure that you're okay with being charged for. I want to make sure that you're okay with being charged for. Think about that for a second. I want to make sure that you're okay with being charged for. There's a couple of things on this truck I want to make sure you're okay with being charged for. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm a consumer and I hear that, I want to hear what you're talking about. I want to hear what's next. Well, I did that purposely so that I could continue to lead the customer back into that sales process, because what do I really want to do next? I want to continue my interviewing, qualifying, rapport building, but now we're kind of selecting, right? And I want to verify the selection, because a customer just went up to this truck and said, what's your bottom line on this one, right? I don't know how sold they really are on this truck. They could have seen it last night and been totally sold on it because it was on our internet, and they know more about it than we do already, and they may be further along in the process, but I'm going to find that out. Or it could have just been a random, hey, what's your bottom line on this one, right? Trying to get an idea. So this leads me to being able to now open up the truck and say, hey, this one has this. Let me share with you, because there's a couple different trucks that have different variations. So I want to get you a price on this one, but also make sure that you are aware that we have some that with a couple of different options that are going to vary just a little bit. By the way, is this option something that you were looking for on your truck, right? I'm going to verify all of that. So now I'm actually drawing the customer in to allow me to demo, qualify, and keep that deal moving forward. I'm going to throw one more out at you, just a sort of a creative control thing. Let's say that you have someone, and we're going to switch gears here, that's a little bit further along in the process. Maybe you're working a deal. You want to present a lease to that customer because you can look and see that it just makes sense for what they're trying to accomplish. So one of the ways I love to present that initial conversation of a lease, or open people's minds to the idea of a lease, is I will ask them questions about it all. By the way, anytime you're pitching a lease or talking about a lease, and I hate to use the word pitching because it also has a negative connotation, but I'm 100% sold on the lease. I'm 100% sold it's the best thing for the customer. And as a result, I think it's the best thing for us, the customer, everybody, right? So it's a win-win. So I'm sold, all right? So I have no issue with bringing it up. It's how we bring it up to the customer, right? Does it make sense? Does it help the deal move forward, right? And does it appeal to the customer? All that good stuff. So what I often use, almost always, I use the trade as an example, because most of the time it's a trade, and most of the time the trade sets us up for an easy close on a lease that, by the way, helps the customer more than it helps us. Again, sold out on the lease. So the point is that, let's say a customer is trading in a 3-4-year-old car. They've got negative equity, which they almost always do. And we're beginning that conversation. We're looking at the new car. One of the things I will ask the customer is, Mr. Customer, when you purchased this car, they charged you for the whole thing, correct? And they're gonna, of course, they're gonna say, what do you mean, Dave? Of course they charged for the whole. Okay. Well, they probably should have at least only charged you for the portion that you used. When you bought this car, did you have an idea that you'd be trading 3 or 4 years down the road, or did you share that with the dealer? Because, let me share with you, because if they had only charged you for these first 3 years, I want to share with you how much money you would have saved. And I want to show you how that works, but, and now you can go into that lease. But the key there is that they should have only charged you for what you were going to use. They should have only charged you for what you're going to use, right? It adds credibility. It means that it would have been the right thing to do then. It's the right thing to look at now. So that's a little tip of a word track. But all of these are prepared responses. Prepared responses will make you a closer, will make you a salesperson if you get these down right. Take a look in the rest of Auto Dealer University. You'll see a million of them, and and imagine, now just think about this. Let's just cut to the chase. Imagine if you had the confidence that every single time you walked out to meet a customer, no matter what they said, you knew that you had a response that was natural, that appealed to the customer, made sense to them, and helped the deal move forward no matter what step you were in and no matter what circumstance you were surrounded by. Imagine the confidence you would have and the difference you would make as a closer. Look, this takes time, right? It's a developed skill. It's just like a pro athlete. You're developing and working on your craft constantly. Hey, we'll see you next week right here on Workout Wednesday.